Today we are featuring Tom Clark, partner and supply chain logistics practice leader at Direct Recruiters. He's going to share a little bit of his expertise and knowledge on the talent and recruiting side of the industry. Tom, welcome, and thanks for giving us some of your time and expertise today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Nathan.
I would like to start with just kind of understanding how we got to this point today. What's a little bit of your background, born and raised, how did you get into supply chain industry?
Born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I live again now, but I have lived several places in between. And when I got into college, went to John Carroll University and studied business management and added a logistics management degree. And I was doing ROTC at the time, so I knew that I was going into the Army.
Army, okay.
I wanted to be an infantry officer, but I also chose to do quartermaster, which is kind of the supply chain of the military. And so it was a good marriage. I often would say I did more supply chain and logistics as an infantry officer than I did as a quartermaster officer, but that was my first professional exposure to supply chain and logistics. And then how I got to the supply chain and talent people aspect of it. After the Army, I transitioned to corporate America and specifically to Staples, the office products company. And so it was the final mile delivery aspect of it. If it was delivered on a Staples truck in about 15 states, that's kind of what I was responsible for. And so spent some time at Staples in their North American delivery segment of the business. Spent some transition to Cardinal Health, again, logistics, but now healthcare instead of office products. And Cardinal's uniquely positioned kind of the business behind healthcare. And then went over to the Cleveland Clinic. Spent some time at Cleveland Clinic in supply chain and specifically running materials management. Before I went to a privately held company, which was not focused on supply chain, but that was more the supporting function. So I often say anything that delivers a product or a service requires a supply chain, and so continued to work in that aspect. And then finally, exposure to a few other things, but ultimately a role in helping other companies find supply chain talent for their teams. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade.
When you had those various roles at those other organizations, you were still a manager of sorts, and you were still responsible for hiring and being a hiring manager, I assume?
Yeah, I guess in every role I ever had, even my first job in the Army, I went in as a second lieutenant and was a platoon leader as my first job. So you don't really lack an interview and hire. You kind of walk down from in processing and you train them up and get them ready. But all of my professional career has had hire and fire, but more importantly, people development, selection, helping them, subordinates and others navigate their careers.
Is this something that you had in mind as a career path? What you do today, was that kind of planned, or have you kind of happenstance and just, kind of how things have happened in your life gotten you to where you are today?
Yeah, good question. Part of it is when I got out of the Army, I knew I wanted to go to corporate America and had this plan that I'd do supply chain and logistics. And that was part of that, kind of structured and planned everything. There was more need for supply chain and logistics professionals than highly trained killers. So I felt like there was just as much need, but there was more job offers for supply chain and logistics professionals in corporate America than Army Rangers. That part was planned. The company that placed me in corporate America was a military transition firm, and they asked me after the interview process, they said, you're one interview away from an offer with Staples, and I was their number one choice, and of all the companies I interviewed with, they were my number one choice. But we just had a big meeting about you, and we'd be curious if you'd like to come work for us. And I said, that's really interesting. I think I'd enjoy it. I think I'd be good at it, but that's not the plan, and I'm going to stick with the plan. And so that probably planted the seed for me right then and there, and I kind of said to myself, that'll be my retirement job. I'll help companies transition military officers to their businesses. And so when I got into recruiting 10 years ago, that was the plan, and I launched Direct Recruiters Military Transition practice, as well as our Military Leadership Excellence practice, which is helping companies hire folks like me, folks that had military experience and the business experience, specific niche business experience. And I also launched the supply chain and logistics practice. And so it was sort of an idea. And when I was getting into doing this at this, 10 years ago, I was at a point where I was either going to do consulting in supply chain and logistics and business leadership and operations improvement, continuous improvement. That's what I did most of my career, whether it was by role and assigned function in the company or just passion. So that was a thought. It was that or this recruiting. And you asked about hiring and developing and firing people. One of the things I've always enjoyed most, even when I was a teenager managing college kids, my time in the military and certainly my time in corporate America, was developing leaders and developing people and helping them navigate their career and get to where they wanted to go. So that's that passion. Now, instead of doing it for one company, I get to do it for a whole bunch of partner clients, right? So it was a combination, an intersection of something that I was passionate about, something that I had this, that's going to be my retirement job. I don't plan on retiring anytime soon, but I've enjoyed doing it for the last 10 years.
You kind of put it on the shelf, and I'll come back to that later.
And came back to it a little sooner than I maybe planned on. But it's been really good.
I share a similar sort of story in that I have this itch and this kind of yearning to be a teacher, but it's not something that I feel like I'm ready for, and I want to go be a practitioner for a while and then circle back around and retirement job like you were saying, and then teach a bit. So
if you asked me when I was in high school what my retirement job was, it was I'm going to retire from business when I'm 50. I'm going to coach business or teach business in high school and coach high school wrestling, and that's right around the corner. And I don't think I'm going to make that deadline, but it's still something I have been involved in coaching wrestling for a long time now. But I don't know that I'll make it to the teaching business in high school. It's still a possibility. I got more careers ahead of me, but that's a good interest that you have, Nathan.
We talked about wrestling, being a coach and whatnot. Who is Tom Clark outside of work? And maybe professionally a little bit, away. We both have CSCMP in common. We can touch on that. But what are you? Who are you outside of the 9 to 5?
Yeah, so I guess you shared kind of what I've built a reputation as kind of America's supply chain recruiter, but that's just one job, and certainly that's the one that pays the bills. And is my passion. But first and foremost, outside of work, I'm a dad. So my wife and I will celebrate 20 years this June. We've got 2 children. My son is heading off to Ohio University for college in the fall. We just got back from his orientation, actually. And my daughter is a sophomore in high school. So 1 boy, 1 girl. Wife and I have been together for like 30 years. Been known each other for 30 years, married for almost 20. And so first and foremost, outside of work, that's who I am. And then I have a few other hats that I wear. You mentioned CSCMP, so I'm the president of the Cleveland Roundtable, CSCMP. I've been involved with it since it was the Council of Logistics Management in the 90s, and then was involved in some other organizations related to supply chain and logistics when I was in the military. But the last 10 years, it's been CSCMP again. And then I also serve as a councilman in my community and the chair of the Economic Development Committee. So just a few different hats. I like to do a lot of different things, and I got a lot more things that I want to do in life. So fill the days, weeks, and months.
Pivot a little bit to career. Do you have any advice for someone who is early in their career? Maybe they don't know exactly what field they want to go into. They're in college or finishing high school. What advice do you share with those folks?
Make the most of every opportunity that you're given. And so that can be a task that you're given, and I think about times in my career, big pivotal opportunities where someone took a chance on me, believed in me, and said, here, go hit a single. You know, all right, I'll hit the single, and then I'm going to steal second, and then I'm going to steal third, and then I'm going to steal home, right? So, you know, if somebody gives you an opportunity to do something, hit it out of the park, right? And if you crush it and you create a reputation and a name for yourself, and do a really good job, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And so that's one, I think, that I tell people when I interact, and young people ask me for career advice. Learn from it. I was always fixated on how do I get to the next, and one of the things that I have learned to enjoy the journey. That's something that I think about and try to live in all aspects of life, but enjoy the journey, enjoy what you're doing, learn as you're doing it, grow, take time to reflect, at a safe moment when you can. A little different when you're on a battlefield. You might not say take time to reflect right then and there, but as soon as you get to your first break in your point of after action review, or you're going through an emergency supply chain disruption situation, when you're at a safe index point that you can take a break and reflect, and again, go back to the other quote of adapt, improvise, and overcome, do that and do that for yourself, and do that for the mission, and also the people around you, because sometimes they can't see and reflect on the impact that they're having, or the impact that the situation is having on them. So I think that's really important.
That sounds like really good advice. But if we kind of bring it down to more of a technical skills level, because that's a higher sort of interpersonal sort of skill. I get a lot of questions of should I focus on data analytics? Should I focus on big, those buzzwords, kind of the way things are right now? From your perspective, is there any particular, if someone's majoring in, getting a logistics degree, for example, like you did, is there some specialization that you think they could add to that, or some area that is complementary to it to kind of prepare them to be a better asset for a company one day?
Yeah, I think great question, and I appreciate you nudging me to move closer to the kind of the technical aspect of it. So I get a lot of data analytics, but most of the key decision makers want someone, and if the individual wants to ascend in the organization, it's not just the data, but understanding the implications of the data, and understanding how all the pieces and parts fit together. And that's truly, I feel like, I often say, people today, businesses today, they don't compete on product as much as they compete on supply chain, and their ability to deliver, and the ability to pull it all together, right? So understanding how it all fits in is really, really important. And oftentimes supply chain people are really good at that, and they're usually people that are driven to that because they like that. They see supply chain as all these links coming together. One of the key things that I did in my career was, when I was at Cardinal, for example, I spent more time with my customers than any of my peers across the country. And ironically, a recruiter called me, and I got an opportunity to move closer to the customer, right? So in healthcare, the patient. So I got to move from the business behind healthcare one step closer to the patient, and go to a client, right? So on a Friday, I said goodbye to my boss, and on Monday, I was his biggest customer. Yeah. And so I think understanding your customer, and sometimes that's internal customer, and sometimes that's external customer. Even in my business, right, in recruiting, right? New hires on my team, I have them read a book about recruiting. I have them read a book about people, not necessarily in that order. The people one comes first typically, but then a book about recruiting, and also a book about business, right? So that's because you got to understand people, because that's who we're talking to every day and what drives them, because you got people on both sides of our equation. You got to understand the process, the science and the art of recruiting, but you ultimately got to understand who the customer is, and that's having a good business foundation. So is that a little bit better answer to your question?
I like that. I've lived a similar life in that I got a degree in logistics and supply chain management, and as I moved through my career, I started hiring people, started being responsible for a P&L, being responsible for growing future leaders of a business and an operation. I started to realize that I was leaning on every skill in every class that I took: accounting, HR, finance, operations management, and marketing. Everything that I studied is part of an undergrad degree in any sort of business discipline. That I was actually having to reach into that toolbox for every one of those disciplines. And so now I'm gone back and I'm working on an MBA. And some people will ask, "Are you getting one in supply chain management? That's your specialty, like that's your thing, right?" And I'm saying, "No, I'm just getting a plain vanilla MBA because as you move up and you start being a leader of a business, you've got to use every tool from that toolbox of business school concepts because you've got to take everything into account. Sure, you're coming at it from maybe a supply chain perspective, but you've got to think about how this affects people, how this affects your use of your capital, how this looks from a marketing perspective and branding perspective for the business." So I've grown to the point where I say, yeah, go get you a good discipline, something technical, but be thinking big picture. And as you grow your career, you're going to have to use all those tools in that business toolbox. So
I couldn't agree with you more. And you think about in healthcare, that becomes really, really important, right? Because if you don't get it right, there's a patient at the end of that supply chain, and you want the patient to live and thrive, and not the opposite, right? So sure. I think that for me that resonates in what you said there.
Can you comment a little bit on what the recruiting process is like? Kind of like a day in the life of Tom Clark. Sure. For a lot of folks, maybe what you do is not something they're familiar with. So could you kind of walk us through what that looks like?
A day in the life, just take this morning. This morning was a combination of companies that reached out that needed help. Some are early stage companies that are going through their funding, and they've just recognized that they've about to receive additional funding that's going to help them grow, and they recognize that they need to invest in people in order to grow, and many of those people are supply chain professionals. And so ultimately there's a lot of time interacting and talking with people and understanding what somebody that's really good would be open to in a new opportunity, right? And they're not looking, but they mentioned a few things that would be better, and that's all very productive and helpful, and it may not be that week or that month or sometimes even that year. I mean, a lot of times the folks that I've placed, I've known for years, and kind of all of a sudden when I'm talking to a client, I'm listening to what they might need, I'm like, okay, I've heard this from the other side of the card before, right? And so the president and CEO of our company explained it to me 10 years ago when I got here. If you played memory as a kid and you flip over all the cards and you're trying to make a match, well, you've got to flip over as many of the cards as possible and take a mental picture. And of course, we have systems that help us with that mental picture. It's not all up here. And there's a team of people that does not. It's not one person by any means. There's certainly a great team of people that do it, and we share that information. But then when you listen to a client say, "We think we might want someone that has this," you can go back and flip over those cards again. The good news is we can flip over several at once and kind of look at them at the same time, and it's not just one pick. We try to give our clients multiple options, good options. The best case scenario, they say, would you think we could hire both of them? Yeah, I think you could hire both of them, right? So and sometimes that happens. Like we really like this person for this, and we didn't mention it to you, but we're thinking about this other role, and so seems like a better fit for that. You think that's something they would be open to? So it's a lot of adapt, improvise, and overcome. A lot of pivoting. It's assessing, and it's looking at our database and external resources and different things to make things happen. It's spending a lot of time in the space and understanding what is current, what is new, what is emerging. All day long I ask people, what's going well, what's not going well? If you could change one thing, what would it be? And so I hear the good, the bad, and the ugly about a lot of companies. And so it helps me understand, it helps my team understand what would be a good fit for somebody, right? This person solved this problem 3 times. Okay, well, they can probably solve it again, and they're willing to do that. Is the client company interested in paying them to do that.
What's the difference between you providing the service for a company versus their own internal HR and kind of a hiring recruiting team
So
trying
really
to take
good
on
question.
the same task?
So specific to supply chain, I live and breathe in that space every day. I stay current in that space. So specific to supply chain for me, that's just one of the differentiators, right? I know and understand that space. And then on my team, I have recruiters that specialize in the different functional areas that are subordinate to supply chain, right?
Okay.
And we do sales roles. We do people that work for a supply chain company, but sell a supply chain product or solution, right? But if it's the chief supply chain officer or their teams all the way down, or someone that sells to kind of that group, we have expertise and experience in that. And that's a lot different than a internal recruiter that's trying to fill frontline associates to the vice president of supply chain, and even bigger organizations that have a couple of different people. The other aspect is when I call someone and I learn about them, I'm learning about them as a person first and everything about them and what they would be open to next. When someone from a brand or a company calls, they're automatically told what the person thinks they want to hear.
Good
because
point.
people are they're selling themselves a little bit or whatever else. But with me, I represent lots of different companies, so I get to first kind of have this additional assessment of what they really want or what they could be good for without the blinders of only recruiting for this one particular company. And so that's another thing that's really valuable. Some companies do have recruiters that are proactive and they go out and they reach out to passive candidates, which is what my team and I do all day, every day. Some teams, their internal recruiters or internal talent teams only weed through the applicants, right? And so certainly if that's all you're doing, that's another piece that's just a huge differentiator. I've got 10 years of experience of talking to supply chain professionals for the purpose of understanding what could be a good next career move for them. I also have the experience of my entire career before that. So that's a little different than an internal talent person. Even if someone's been doing it a long time, they probably haven't been doing it over and over in the same space. So it's unlikely that they understand the space that well.
Gotcha.
That's
So
one of the big differences.
I guess it's almost kind of, if we think about companies that are for sale, I think there's like a saying that no good, well-run company is for sale. You've got to go actively pursue that business and say, hey, I'm interested in acquiring this. Because if it's performing well, it's not so on the market. And so one thing that sounds like you do maybe is that you can go and actively seek talent that's out there that's performing at a high level today that is not in the market, not really looking to make any changes, but they have that skill set and that experience that would be valuable for another company, and you kind of go facilitate that recruiting.
That's true.
Process.
But I do want to, if you will, counter your analogy, and I say that because in the space right now with I do a lot of work with private equity companies, and so they want to sell when they're at the peak, right? And so they are doing well, they are performing really well. They did maybe just get some new talent that Tom placed on their team to shore up their supply chain, and that's when they want to sell. Sometimes they're selling to a publicly traded company, sometimes they're selling to a larger private equity group that's good at taking it. Maybe that PE firm took it from a $50 million company to a $200 million company, and now it's getting sold to the private equity group or the capital investment group that has a tendency to grow companies from 2 to 5 to 1 to 2 billion, right? And so there's different segments of that. So in that case, they do want to sell when they're at the top.
Makes sense.
And I have made some introductions along that line too. But you're right to your analogy that many times you want someone that has their head down and is doing a great job for your competitor in the same space, or for your supplier, and they would really they never even thought about moving to the vendor. They never thought about moving to the customer. And so you get these people that you get to move up or down the chain a little bit, and that can be super beneficial to both parties.
I want to put a question out there, and it's one that I get a lot when I'm talking to college students, is they're often asking me, how do I word my resume to kind of get through the applicant tracking system process? And honestly, I never have a good answer because most of all my career moves have all been through relationship building, all through networking, not much submitting resumes and applying for jobs, which I've been really fortunate, but it's because I've just naturally had that networking sort of mentality and put action behind it. But what advice, for those folks that are putting out 100 applications, they've got to tweak their resume with the right wording and all that sort of stuff to get the applicant tracking system to accept the keywords? I know that's maybe a niche kind of question, but I know there's a lot of students out there who have that question on their mind.
And I'll tell you, I'm more like you, and I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
Gotcha.
So I'll give an answer. At first, I'll say that that's probably not the best path, right? So now you're just playing the math game, right? And so obviously having the keywords and the buzzwords on there, right? But the whole goal of that is to get through the filter that allows a person to look at you and hire you, okay? And connect. I don't know. I know companies that rule people out because of assessments, because of, they use AI to slim down the pile. I mean, let's just take you apply for a job online, and let's say there's 1,000 applicants, and let's say that the average person only looks at a resume for 6 seconds. So, just looking 6 seconds at 1,000 applicants takes a long enough time, right? And so the AI can help filter that down so that they're only looking at 100. And then they're taking those 100 and they're looking at the 100 for 6 seconds, and then they're taking the 20 that came out of the 1,000, that came out of the 100, and now they're going to spend 2 minutes on each of those 20. They're going to take an hour. They're going to spend 2 minutes on each of those 20, and they're going to pick 5. Okay? So I'd be less concerned about how I get my resume from 1,000 or 10,000 to 100 to 20. I'd be really concerned about how do I make my resume as good as possible when I get down to the 5 that I'm one of the folks that's called in or has a virtual interview or whatever else. And I can give really good advice on that. And that is, are you more proud of where you've worked or the titles that you've had? That should be the headline, one of those two things, right? And so that should pop off. Which aligns more with where you're trying to go? I talked about people moving up and down the value chain. In my business, many times, not every time, but many times, someone is looking for someone that's been there and done that before. Okay, that reduces their risk. This person's got a proven track record of success. So if I'm looking for XYZ, I want someone who's already done XYZ. Same title, very similar title. Maybe one title down, maybe one title up or down in the kind of the value chain, left or right. And then I get into the bullets that often come underneath a resume. And if I've got 5 bullets under that position, I want 3 of them to be quantifiable accomplishments. If I've got 8 bullets, I want 5 of them to be quantifiable accomplishments. And quantifiable doesn't simply mean numbers that are scope and scale. Because Nathan, if you and I had the same job, we'd have the same scope and scale. But you might have done a lot better at it than I. You might be ranked number 1. You might have delivered 99%, and I only delivered 97%. So that there's more factors to that. Why did you versus I? But on a resume, on the bullets, that feels good. That sounds good. I want to learn more about how they did that to see if they could do that here. So I really try to get people and help people focus on how to have a good resume from that standpoint. And how to present that information really well as it applies to that particular customer and their particular potential employer problem point, not so much the AI, data analytics, data mining software. A long time ago, what people used to do is they'd have an extra page, and at every word possible that the system could be looking for, but they'd use white letters on a white page. And so they'd submit a 3-page resume, 2 pages were their actual resume, and the 3rd page looked blank, but it actually was hiding every single word. And it worked. It fooled the system. 100% fooled the system. the applicant tracking systems are a little bit smarter now. I don't think it fools it anymore, and they're looking for more stuff. But ask AI. I don't have the best answer into how to beat the AI system.
The interesting thing is that it's now you've got AI, you got ChatGPT to help you embellish your resume, help tweak it for whatever role you might be applying for. And then you've got the ATS AI who's reading that sort of AI tweaked. And so I've been sensing that it's kind of like spy versus spy, and that everyone's kind of using the same technology to try to fight on the battlefield of recruiting. And what I feel like is happening is just we're just getting further and further from genuine relationships and real people business, that it's becoming robot versus robot out there kind of fighting for us.
It's a great point, and I talk about a lot about, Covey's book, The Speed of Trust, right? And so I don't think people really trust AI that much yet, right? So it comes down to that's going to filter it and get me to get a lot of the busy work done, but you mentioned the tools and everything to help you with your resume, but there's tools that help you with your cover letter, and people send me cover letters and emails and all the time, that one's AI, that one's AI, that one's AI. So there is still a good amount of making a genuine connection and building genuine relationships being the best path, and that's candidly part of what gives me a huge advantage over, the internal or the automatic systems. Is that's what we do all day, every day.
Yeah. Last question for you, Tom.
Sure.
In the time that you've been doing, what you do, working in the supply chain industry, placing talent, in the best place it could be, I feel like there's been a rise in the importance of the supply chain executive in a company, and I think there's like some trends going where CEOs and stuff are coming from the supply chain sort of organization. Can you talk a little about, from what you've seen from your perspective, where supply chain and logistics is becoming more of a crucial factor in a business, and it's leading to bigger responsibilities and kind of higher rises in the career sort of trajectory for supply chain professionals?
Happy to. I used to do a presentation and I talked about that a lot, and I'd put up 3 examples of that. And the first example, I'll only share one here, but the first example I'll give is Walmart. Okay, so Walmart was the first company, big, well-known company, that hired someone to the CEO seat from really the supply chain leadership seat. And I used to give that presentation a lot. And then this thing called COVID happened. And then everybody was talking about supply chain, and I didn't need to give that presentation anymore because people realized just how important it was. And I made the comment earlier when we were talking about how companies today compete based on their supply chain, not so much on their product or anything else, but on their supply chain. Their supply chain's ability to deliver that product, to deliver that service, and that's crucial. And so the companies that are winning, the companies that are growing, have really, really good supply chain teams, really good supply chain leaders. It is definitely about growing that muscle, growing that strength. The supply chain, kind of people talk about the seat at the table. Yeah, supply chain got a seat at the table. And so when COVID happened, companies were calling me and they were either saying, our supply chain leader was really good, and he'd been telling us, or she'd been telling us for years, that I need this seat filled and this seat filled, and I need to dual source instead of single source or whatever else. And all of a sudden they said, and now I've got the green light and I can hire those people. Other companies were calling and saying, our supply chain leader didn't tell us these things and we need a new one. Yeah. And so both of those things created a kind of a boom in our business. As of right now, we still have, you mentioned it kind of passively, you snuck it in there, the best place to be, what a great place to grow a career and have a profession. The awareness of the importance of it is exploding. Just like every other industry, there are people that are retiring every single day in this space, and they're people with a lot of knowledge. And a lot of experience, and if you can spend just a little bit of time gaining that, plus what you learned in school, and plus what you learned in your last 2 or 3 jobs, the future is bright. And so I think that it is going to continue for a long time, and continue to be a really great space to grow a career and make a difference.
It's a good endorsement for what I do, what you do, what many folks do, here to kind of keep the lights on and keep products on shelves and keep us all taken care of.
I mean, I just think about this. We got a chief supply chain officer at a hospital that's going to start later next month. It's May 31st right now, so next month, right?
Yeah.
And we've got a manufacturing company that we've got 2 or 3 folks starting on their team, because there's companies growing there in the aerospace and defense industry. We've worked with candy companies and plumbing companies. Like, it's just everyone has a space. And once you learn how to move the widget and serve the customer, not every industry is the same, but there's a lot of transferable skills in that professional function, just like a CFO making a change or a CHRO making a change.
Right. I was talking with someone who is a VP of marketing a while ago, and she came into the industry, logistics industry, not from in the industry, and she said, at the end of the day, we're all just selling a story, building a brand, and getting, that company on top of possible customers' minds and whatnot, and converting that into revenue. So,
yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, so that was an awesome conversation, Tom. I feel like I learned a lot about the world of recruiting and talent in supply chain and in logistics, and I'm honestly a little bit inspired by the fact that you had this idea some years ago to circle back around and make this kind of like your second career, your retirement job or whatnot, and that you actually executed on that, and that you made that happen. And that's pretty inspiring for me personally. So I appreciate you sharing that story. Sure. And again, I would say thanks on behalf of everyone who probably got lots of nuggets of wisdom from this conversation, and look forward to keeping up with you and seeing what you're doing there with the roundtable there in Ohio and everything else. So thanks again, Tom. Any closing remarks from your side?
No, I mean, I enjoyed it. I wasn't sure exactly where we'd go. I feel like it was very enjoyable. We just had a conversation. It was hopefully it was beneficial. Always enjoy having a conversation, and I look forward to your and I next time to interact. So thanks for the time.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom.